Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and it's all very exciting on the UK-EU summit today. Maybe some of you are as excited as I am about it. I am loving it. Although I will probably have more to say at some point, maybe tomorrow, I want to focus in on the fishing rights and agri-food deal here because it provides easy ammunition for Labour against especially the Tories, but even Nigel Farage. But first, for daily news and commentary, please hit the subscribe button to stay notified. So there are a number of good announcements from the summit today. It seems to have actually gone further than the report suggested at the weekend. But I want to focus in on one aspect of the deal, the one which will be the spiciest politically. So of the various things coming up today at the summit, one of the key issues was fishing rights and agri-food checks. So fishing rights refers to how much access EU fishermen have to British fishing waters. The agri-food deal refers to a significant reduction on the checks required between the UK and the EU in return for alignment of standards on those affected goods. And the two issues are very much linked. Without wasting time on the wrangles which were to be had ahead of this announcement, the agreement is as follows. We have agreed to reduce agri-food checks on the basis of common standards. That is a huge boost to us. That was Labour's number one ask of the EU. This agreement also will not be time limited, as some in the EU wanted. It's an indefinite arrangement. In return, we will guarantee the current level of EU access to British fishing waters until 2038. So that is time limited. So there's a sense in which we got what we wanted, the agri-food deal on a permanent basis, but the fishing deal is temporary. So that looks very much like a big win for the British team, which Starmer should loudly mention whenever someone puts a microphone in front of his face for some time to come. In fact, it should be the new "my father was a tool maker." However, the way I look at it, by 2038, we're either already back in the EU or heading that way anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Now, the Conservatives and Reform UK are predictably belly aching about the fishing arrangement. So how should Starmer deal with both of them? Well, the Conservatives really easy. Starmer hasn't actually conceded anything like greater access. What he has agreed to is the same access as the Conservatives agreed in the deal which Boris Johnson and the Tory client media hailed as a marvellous deal from the rooftops. As all Starmer has done is said that the arrangement can continue, which although it was due to be reviewed next year, the implication in the way Johnson's trading cooperation agreement was set up was that it would continue beyond that point anyway. So the Conservatives have got absolutely nothing here, right? However, Farage can freely attack both Tory and Labour deals. Not that he did. Nigel Farage is on record as being happy with the trading cooperation agreement. But let's be honest, he does have a habit of rewriting history, doesn't he? So let's say he now decides that despite the documentary evidence, he didn't like the Tory deal after all. So what about him? Well, British fishermen actually win from this deal. British consumers consume relatively little fish caught in British waters. We're not a big fish consuming nation compared to other major fishing nations, but what we do eat tends to be caught in other waters like Icelandic cod. This is why Jacob Rees-Mogg thought that the British fish would be happy. First, because he didn't understand that fish migrate. I suppose because he's only ever seen a fish in a glass tanker on his plate. And second, because he didn't think anyone would be catching them. The fish which British fishermen catch in British waters is mostly bought by people in the EU. It's the markets of France which sell British fish. And since the extreme Tory Brexit, selling it on the continental market has been difficult due in no small part to the time-consuming checks. Time-consuming checks means the fish goes off. The less fresh that fish is at the market, the lower the price it commands. This is why, since Brexit, although the amount of fish that British fishermen are landing is greater, which sounds good, the price they're selling it for has gone down. And I don't mean the price per tonne has gone down. I mean the money British fishermen are bringing in has gone down. British fishermen are making less money than before Brexit, but working harder for it. I wish Labour had emphasised that a lot more. But Starmer can now go to British fishermen and say that he's given them easier access to the European market and he hasn't had to change the conditions that Boris Johnson, the man they supported, arranged for them in 2020. That's what I'd be saying if I were a Labour MP, whether a minister or not. It's the same agreement on fishing rights. It extends it. The Tories and Nigel Farage both supported it. Only this way, they're also giving fishermen and farmers improved access to their export customers as well. In fact, although I'll want to see the official report before saying anything too definite, looking at some of the calculations in The Guardian from the Centre for European Reform, the overall measures being announced at this summit, they don't compensate for Brexit, of course, but they do look like being worth much more than all the previous post-Brexit trade deals put together, including the India trade deal from earlier this month. But I'll say more about that when I see an official report with actual figures. But if Farage wants to keep making a fuss, I mean, Starmer can just remind him that the Brexit referendum was about leaving the EU. It wasn't about hurting trade, it wasn't about hurting jobs, and it was certainly not about hurting the NHS. Finally, it is worth just pointing out how Labour are reported to be aiming to spin this, rather than what I think they should do, in order to avoid treading on Brexit sensitivities. Because they have a bit of a quandary at the moment, don't they? They're trying to appeal to the Brexity types, and, you know, there are a lot of them in some of their key seats, so that's understandable. At the same time, they need to push for closer and closer links with the EU for economic reasons, right? So they've had this position for a couple of years, but it's much more urgent now. They've been trying to actively avoid stoking Brexit divisions. So they would rather conduct these trade negotiations in a way that international deals used to be negotiated when I was a lad, quietly, behind the scenes, no great interest from the media, because you know why, it's boring. But because even mundane international agreements are now of intense interest because of the political spin, boring technical details are now headline news. So according to one report this weekend, Labour's approach is just to ignore any links to Brexit. In fact, the quote was, say it's got F all to do with Brexit. Starmer's basically taken the line that, look, this summit today has nothing to do with Brexit, right? Now, obviously, it does have everything to do with Brexit because without Brexit, we wouldn't need it. But what he means is, look, a lot of people, whenever the UK is negotiating with, say, the US or India or Australia and so on, they're just trade talks, right? They're just trade talks. But as soon as they talk to the EU, all of a sudden the Brexit dividing lines hone into view. Labour want to claim, look, we're just talking to the EU just like we're talking to everyone else. That if you're going to discuss trade with countries around the world, why wouldn't you with your nearest neighbours and most important market? So that's the line being taken. There's no extra Brexit dimension with either the current EU talks or the ones which will take place in the future. They're just talks with international partners which are providing more opportunities for British businesses, more jobs, cheaper energy, cheaper goods. So the word seems to be that ministers at least will not talk about EU deals in Brexit terms. They're just negotiations for better deals. I could sort of imagine Keir Starmer going into cabinet and going, right, guys, we've got another take here. Don't mention Brexit. I mentioned it once, but I think I got away with it. And the reason, of course, is he wants voters to focus on the economy, the NHS, housing, and everything else he's delivering on. He doesn't want them prioritising ideological battles because that instantly splits people, especially as Reform UK are a way more serious threat now than when Labour started on this line as well. Farage is weak when he has to talk about the real world, and he's strong when he gets to talk about subjective bollocks. So as far as Labour are concerned, they've negotiated a permanent reduction in trade barriers for fishermen and farmers and not really conceded anything for either of those two sectors for it, because the EU access agreed is the same access agreed by the Conservatives and supported by Nigel Farage. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, please click the like button and subscribe for further content. If you'd like to support the channel further, you can click the join button for memberships. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.